And so then you see this kind of emergence, as I said, 50,000 years ago, you start seeing the emergence of what becomes the Asians and Europeans. But I mean, what probably many people don't realize is that, you know, Europeans and Asians have not, I mean, today we think about Europeans are in Europe, Asians are in Asia, right? That's how we look at it. And but when you go back in time, it has not always remained like that. So there's been plenty of periods where, large part of Asia was actually occupied of genetically speaking European populations, and also periods where Asians are moving. For example, they are in North Asia and then they're moving into Southeast Asia, kind of mixing up with, you can say, some of the people who were left behind when people crossed into Australia. It's not like everybody went to Australia, right? There was people along the way. So you can say the world that we know of today, I mean, the world that you and I and everybody else learn in school and see, Asians in Asia, Europeans in Europe, this is a very, very young world. It's for you can say the whole genetic composition of present-day Europeans. You can say the main characteristics, if you want, is formed within just the last 5,000 years. And when we go to Western and Central Asia, we are only back in the medieval times. I mean, right? So it's around 1,000 years ago. So it's one of the things that ancient genomics really have. I think there's two things that it has really changed our minds with compared to what we generally thought before. One is that people are super mobile, right? I mean, there was this notion that when we left Africa, we went to the different parts of Europe, different parts of Asia, etc., and then we kind of stayed put, wherever we went, right? And when we had a cultural change, it was always because the same people learned to do something new, right? So when you went from hunter-gatherer to agriculture in Europe, it was because you learned to do something new, right? But it was the same people who basically stayed. And ancient genomics have very clearly shown this is not the case. I mean, people have been super mobile, and many of these, you can say, historical transitions or prehistoric transitions from hunter-gathering to farming, from farming to Bronze Age, from Bronze Age to Iron Age, from Iron Age to Viking period and so forth, is actually a result of migration of people. I mean, new people entering an area, meeting somebody else, mixing up with them, right? Transferring different types of knowledge with them. So the world, as I said, the world that we observe today is very, very young. I mean, for most parts.
So 50, 60,000 years ago, I think you said, that's when the populations that gave rise to present-day Europeans and present-day East Asians first started diverging. So at that time, 50, 60,000 years ago, everyone still had like dark skin.
Yeah. As far as we know, yes.
And were they all still like hunter-gatherers at that time? And
yes.
How long does it take from then to get to the first farming societies?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first farming, there's still debate about exactly when you see it, right? But, something around 12,000 years ago is where you see the early attempts. And it's happening in the Middle East and Near East, right? Where you both domesticate plants and animals. And then there seems to be an independent domestication event, if you want, of rice happening in the Yangtze region in China. And you also see close to the same time period, maybe slightly later, you see the domestication of corn in America, right? So you can say you have these kind of three domestication events in the world that, as far as we know, have not much to do with each other. It happens kind of independently, more or less independently, but very closely around the same time.
I see. So farming probably didn't develop one place and then spread through cultural transmission from there. It probably was independently discovered in different times and places.
Exactly. And for many years before ancient genetics, the general notion was that, yes, it was developed in these different places, but it spread as culture, right? It was not by humans. It was spreading by culture. I heard from my neighbor that heard from his neighbor, from his neighbor, all the way down to the Middle East. Well, you can do this, right? So I learned in school, Eske, you derive from the Stone Age man in Denmark, direct lineage up to today. And for both, where we have really done some investigation on this, is for Europe and it's for Asia. And in both cases, this story is wrong. So it's very clear that the domestication practices are being spread by humans moving. So it's humans moving from the Middle and Near East up through Europe, particularly Western Europe. And it's peoples from the Yangtze region in China moving south, right, into Southeast Asia, bringing with them rice. And in both cases, you can say it result in some places by a mixture of the two populations. I mean, the hunter-gatherers and you can say the farmers, right? And in some regions, we can also see that it actually resulted in a replacement. I mean, it means one group is basically killing off or replacing another group. So in Denmark, for example, where you have the most skeletons from this transition period, I think anywhere in the world, really, there everybody first thought, well, okay, it's just, farmers entering Denmark in the end and then mixing with the Danes. But more recently, we could see when we sequenced a lot of these, this is not the case. What happens is they're coming at mixed from the south, right? So you can say there was happy days in the south where hunters met farmers, they mixed, got children, changed to become agriculturalists. And then when these guys move further north, and when they move further north and get into northern Germany and Denmark at least, then they replace all the original hunter-gatherers within 1 to 2 generations, right? So to me at least, we don't know exactly how it happened. We don't find any pathogens. So it looks to me like it's some kind of genocide, to be honest. So it varies from region to region exactly what happened. But it's very clear it's this kind of movement of people bringing with them new technology, right?
When people in the Middle Eastern region that eventually become the Europeans start to move into the geographic region of Europe as we define it today, when did that start to happen, and how much of it had to do with receding glaciers or the ice age or climate change?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, you can say when this is happening, it's starting around 10,000 years ago. And at that time, you are well into what we call the Holocene, the warming period we're living in today. So the glaciers have disappeared, right? I mean, it's you can say it's a non-glaciated landscape that they're moving into. So it hasn't really much to do with the glaciers. I mean, the glaciers play a role earlier in terms of, you can say, the survival of the hunter-gatherers in there, and some seems to be surviving in some refuge, where there's less harsh. And then when the ice retreats, they're expanding out and so forth. But the lifestyle remains the same, right? And as far as we can see, it's kind of the same peoples, if you want. It's maybe one pocket that are surviving and expanding out, but overall it's the same. Where you can say the real changes are happening, as I said, is from around 10,000 years ago, right? Because first you have the agriculturalists coming, and they have a severe impact, right? I mean, you are going from a diet which has been mainly, meat, fish, berries, roots, right? What you would call a Stone Age diet today. Some people want to even living like this today, believe it's healthy. But these agriculturalists are basically coming with a diet that is similar to muesli, right? To present day muesli. So very rich in carbohydrates, right? And it, you can say the the implication of this lifestyle change is massive. So it's both in terms, of course, the dietary, it's in terms of, you go from being very mobile, right? The hunter-gatherers are super mobile. They're living in very small groups, right? And suddenly you become stationary, you live in larger groups. And we see, massive selection of the so-called fats region. So
fatty acid metabolism genes.
Yes, exactly. So when you eat fish and meat, you're getting long chain fatty acids directly from the diet, right? And you need that for your brain and for your nervous system, etc. But when you eat grain, you get it as short chain fatty acids, and the body needs to basically make it into long chain fatty acids. And the fats region is involved in this. And we see massive selection. That means it's a matter of survival and reproduction, right? Whether you are capable of doing this. So,
meaning you're seeing selection for the spread of genes that can handle shorter chain fatty acids that you find in a more carb-rich diet.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So you see, so it really changes, you can say, the genetic makeup really of the peoples in Europe, right? In order to adapt to this new lifestyle. And then, in Europe, you can say, then we have, it's quite interesting because in Western Europe, this is where you see this movement going up, right? But there is actually a climb going from the Baltic countries all the way down to the Black Sea, where for whatever reason, we don't know why, but you see that the hunter-gatherers on the east side of the cline is actually genetically different from those on the west side. And for some reason, these farmers from the Middle East are only really entering on the west side. So the west side gets, so the cline between east and west gets further deepened, right? Because the farmers are only going in and mixing with the groups on the west side. Maybe it's something to do with, culture. They are more hostile. We don't know, but it's very clear. It's not a physical, it's not a geographical barrier. There's nothing, that should kind of separate the two, but it does. And that barrier actually first dissolves in the Bronze Age around 5,000 years ago. So around 5,000 years ago, you have the last major migration into Europe. So now, we are farmers in the west, and on the east side, they still remain hunter-gatherers.
So there's like this invisible barrier between them. There's not like a giant mountain there separating them, but something, maybe language, maybe culture, is preventing them from mixing. And then you said there's a last major migration into Europe.
Yes.
Who's migrating? Who is this migrating?
Yes. So this last major migration, is from the Pontic Steppe. And the Pontic Steppe is the area which is Ukraine today, parts of Belarus and Russia. And there's a people there that are, you can say, pastoralists. They are drinking milk. They have, big herds of cattle, sheep, and so forth. We call this group Yamnaya. And they are expanding, this is also something that you didn't know before ancient genomics, but 5,000 years ago, we see an expansion from this Pontic Steppe, both northwest into Europe and eastwards into Asia. And they have an enormous cultural and genetic impact in Europe, particularly in northwestern Europe. So they are coming in. They are very tall.
I was about to ask you, is their stature different? Is their bone structure different?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So the hunter-gatherers were quite tall, many of them. And they were actually, this is interesting, they were quite healthy. When you look at them, they're quite healthy. The farmers are very short, small generally, short in stature, and actually surprisingly unhealthy. Their teeth are in very bad shape. They have worn down.
I've heard about this before. Is that probably because the farming lifestyle, the things that they started eating, were driving that unhealth?
Yeah, probably was part of it at least. And it's kind of it's interesting to think about, right? Because farming obviously is the lifestyle that wins the battle, right? And it actually wins not only 10,000 years ago in Europe, but all across the globe, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody are eating pizza and drinking Coke, which is just an advanced form of muesli, right? And so farming is winning as a lifestyle. And it's a bit surprising when you look at the hunter-gatherers and the farmers, right? Because the hunter-gatherers are super healthy looking. The skeletons, the farmers look really poor, right? But evolution, it just reminds us really that evolution is not about, uh, you know,
The physically strongest per se. It's
no, it's
about
about
who.
who's getting most kids, right? That
Yes,
survive.
yes.
That's really what it's all about, right? So you can have a pretty horrible life as long as you get enough kids that survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the conclusion is, well, for some reason, the farmers are simply getting more kids that survives, and they're winning this battle. But it means that the you can say the Europeans after the farmers have entered are actually much smaller in stature. I mean, they got a lot of farming gear